Hello and welcome to the Whitwam Organics Weekly Garden and Nursery Report. I'm David Whitwam, your host. Thank you so much for joining me. This week, we are going to talk about something that I've had come up multiple times. This is a great time of year to talk about it, and that is water. So I want to talk about how I water my gardens, how I've seen people water their gardens, what water are we using? Are we using rainwater? Are we using water from a spigot? Things to watch out for. But really, before we get into the talking about water, and I might even bring up a little bit about hydroponics. Definitely not my area of expertise, but an article came across my way, and I do want to kind of share a little bit about it. But before we get into all that, let me tell you guys a little bit about what I've been doing in the gardens for the past week. Lots of weeding. The weeds are definitely responding to this warmer weather and popping. I've been harvesting and harvesting and harvesting. Our harvests in the community gardens that I work with have been absolutely amazing these past couple weeks. Today we harvested, let's see if I have the list. No, I didn't save it. Let me see if I can remember. We harvested Jericho romaine, Manoa lettuce, carrots, bok choy, just a lot of lettuce. What else did we harvest today? Collards. Oh, how can I forget collards? We harvested two kinds of collards, Georgia Southern collards, and I call them collards. Portuguese collards are also known as Portuguese kale or Portuguese cabbage. Essentially, it looks like a big, giant collard plant to me. And my other garden earlier this week, we harvested a ton of Japanese eggplants. We were actually tearing the plants out and just got buckets and buckets of harvest from the Japanese eggplants before we ripped them out. We're ripping them out because that particular garden is ready to move on to other crops. They've been producing like crazy all winter. And let's see, at my other garden, I just ripped out the strawberry plants, but they were suffering pretty bad from spider mites, and I didn't rip them out and throw them away. I ripped them out and have them sitting in a container right now away from my nursery, and the plan is to pot them up into 1 gallon pots, treat them really good, because in a lot of these gardens I only get to them once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on my contract, which just wasn't enough to really get on top of the spider mite. So I ripped all the strawberry plants out. I'm going to put them in 1 gallon pots. And the plan is, now that I'll have them here on site, I'm going to keep them out front away from the nursery out back, is I'll be able to treat them with organic treatment more regularly, which is definitely more effective than doing it sparsely and letting the generations just continue to pop. So consistency is pretty important with some of these organic pesticides, which I just can't do when I'm not there. So I tore out the strawberry plants. The plan is to revive them and replant them in another spot in the garden in the next couple of weeks. That's going to get a little more shade in the upcoming spring season. Strawberries will actually continue to produce well into the summer. They just need some protection from the sun. The berries will get smaller. You'll get less. They are less productive, but if you try and grow your strawberries well into the summer, you'll very quickly see why the strawberry farmers in Florida tear their strawberries out and move on to another crop. Because, if you're if you're farming for profit and your production per acre drops just by 10%, you're not making any money anymore. So I believe in my news special last week, I brought this up, and I even mentioned that some of the strawberry farmers pull their stuff out even extra early so they can get another crop in before the heat of the summer hits. And then also they pull their strawberries out a little on the early side it depends on what the weather looks like up north. As the strawberries begin to ripen in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, as it starts warming up, you have other strawberries that hit the market and the price goes down. So being early on the game, our strawberry farmers here in Florida get a premium price for their berries. And that's, kind of how they have their numbers worked out. So as soon as the price starts dropping, or if they think summer's coming early, I've talked to a good few strawberry farmers in Florida that actually, whether or not any of these factors are happening, they always rip their plants out early and plant a new crop. This is so far every farmer I've talked to that employs workers that migrate, with the seasons. And the reason why they do that is because if they like drag it all the way out to the end and then they just don't even have time to get another crop in, then those workers will pull their kids out of school and go up north where the work is. So I've talked to a lot of farmers in Plant City that will actually take the strawberries out early, make sure they get another crop of cantaloupe or zucchini in. And they said they break even on them. They don't even make money on them. It's literally just so their workers can be paid and stay till the end when school gets out. So they don't have to pull their kids out of school and go up north. I think that's pretty admirable. And I can definitely respect that. Why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because just if you're from Florida or been in Florida for a while and new to gardening, don't just assume that because out there in the farming world and the grocery store world, when our strawberry season ends here, that's when your strawberry season needs to end in your garden. Though, like I said, if you get them, and they move pretty easy. I mean, you dig them up, move them to a spot that late spring and going into summer is going to get more shade. They'll keep going well into the summer. Smaller berries, but still you can enjoy them. Lots of the bok choys that we had planted bolted. Chinese cabbages are bolting early. I'm a little upset about that. I'm kind of making a swing right now into warmer season crops. Definitely going to put some spring stuff in, but I'm probably going to be even getting summer stuff started a little bit early this year. As wonderful and cool as our winter was, I really feel like summer's coming early. Could be wrong. I'll probably be wrong because that's what I'm planning on. So let's see what we're looking at here. I haven't looked at the weather in like 3 days. The last time I looked, I wasn't seeing any big dips on the 2-week forecast. Okay. It's going back down. So like Wednesday the 10th, March 10th, they got us at 79 for a high and 60 degrees. I'm in Tampa, by the way, if you're watching this. So 79 for the high, 60 for the nighttime low. Oh, that's good. Okay. It was going up. So like Thursday the 4th, 62. I'm going to just say the nighttime lows. Friday the 5th, 60 for nighttime lows. Saturday the 6th, 61. 7th, 60. That's good. It was tracking more toward, and by the way, the highs are all like upper 70s to 80. But it was tracking to mid to upper 60s. Oh gosh, maybe a dip will come down. That would be great to have a cooler spring and be able to see when we get a cooler spring, it extends the season of a lot of our winter stuff. If we have a cooler spring or kind of a warmer spring, it's still spring weather and your spring stuff is going to do great. I mean, we're not talking about hot, but when I start seeing those temperatures creeping up toward the mid 60s for nighttime lows, consistently, that's usually the end of the winter stuff. It can't take it for too long. That's usually you'll get aphids, so lots of problems. I love my winter vegetables. I love my leafy greens. That's really good. So I was debating on whether or not to do another round of carrots in some of my gardens. I think I'm going to. I'm gonna give it a shot. I think we'll have enough cool weather that I'll get another harvest of carrots. The carrots I'm putting in right now are 45 to 65 day carrots. So 45 days, we can start pulling them out on the smaller side. It's if you go on the website, it's the Cosmic Purple carrots. And then right around 60 days, they'll be full size. They grow really, really fast. I grow them in full sun. I love the Cosmic Purple carrots. Nursery report, we have put all of our tomatoes online. Something that's a little bit new, I've been trying to expand my catalog as far as specifically, I've always had a lot of items in my catalog that do well here, late spring, summer, and into fall. So that's called the heat loving greens and things. But I've tried, and I'll continue to try and track down specifically Florida heirlooms, and I've grabbed a couple. So I found these collections, Florida. So I have a new section on the website. It used to just be called Florida Natives, and that's where I kept all of our Florida Natives. And I've expanded that to Florida Natives, Florida Heirlooms, and Florida Friendly. So all of the Florida Friendly plants, like the giant pentas, sterile lantana, that's all now in there. So anything that's Florida Friendly, as far as like landscaping plants and butterfly plants, or Florida Native, and then Florida Heirloom. So for Florida Heirloom, we have a Florida giant watermelon. We have the Jubilee watermelon, Florida broadleaf mustards, of course, the Everglade tomato, which we've always had, Floridade tomato, and the Homestead tomato. Both of those are determinate. Before that, the only determinate I had in my catalog was a Roma tomato. We had a indeterminate Roma and we had a determinate Roma, and now we have two more. These are both larger slicing tomatoes. So I'm really excited about those. Oh, why couldn't I see that? Did I forget to mark it? Nope, it's right there. And then also a variegated Florida heirloom collards. Really excited about those. Apparently they only get variegated if we have a really cold winter. Otherwise they just look like collards, but very excited about those. And so those are new to the list. Everything, if you're new to gardening and you go on my website under the heat loving greens and things list, and you picked, like right now, today, picked all of your crop picks from that list, you're going to do amazing. Where you start getting into, like, you know, you may or may not do good is grabbing stuff from other parts of the list, because that's all stuff that I've grown successfully through the summer. Some of the things on that list are extremely heat tolerant, and some of the things on that list absolutely love the summer. The things on that list that are extremely heat tolerant, if you plant them now, they will do very well for you all the way up to and maybe a little bit past the summer solstice, probably into like July. And then you can take 2 breaths, go to the beach for 2 weeks, and then plant another round of that stuff. So some of the stuff that's very, 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 very heat tolerant, it doesn't actually make it all the way through the summer, but you can plant like back to back. Almost like we plant tomatoes in the fall and the spring. Plant your tomatoes in the fall, you might like die from a freeze in, you know, the winter, and then just a few weeks later, or maybe even before that, indoors, we're planting seeds for spring tomatoes. So, you know, back to back, stuff that will make it all the way through summer. Some of that stuff I still like to overlap my plantings. So like take okra, for example. If you are planting okra this early and you want to have okra, so you can pretty much have okra probably all the way to November. I don't recommend whatever okra you're eating off of in November should not be the okra you're planting today. plant 2 rounds of okra in 2 different locations. 10 out of 10 times that I've gotten nematodes on my okra is when I've left it in too long. So either grow it in pots, then you can do that, or plant okra now, and then, you know, maybe in another spot in your garden where you had spring stuff or winter stuff. Like by the time that stuff starts petering out in April or May, maybe even June, plant a new round of okra right there. And then once that second round of okra starts producing, tear out your first round. So it just, my experience is nematodes always show up on tired old plants. Another example, and why I usually will plant 2 rounds of tomatoes. So if I plant tomatoes in the fall, whatever tomatoes I had in the fall, if they make it through the winter, those aren't the same tomato plants that I'm harvesting off of come April and May. The plants that I'm harvesting off of come April and May are ones that I planted in January and plant them out in a different location. 10 out of 10 times that I've gotten nematodes on my tomato plants, it's from a tomato plant that I had in over the fall, planted in the summer, harvested over the fall, and made it through the winter. They always have the worst problems. Another crop I kind of do something similar with, but it's not a nematode issue, is summer squash and zucchini. So I always do an early planting of those. We've got them already going in some of our gardens. They've already got flowers on them, and they're almost starting to produce squash. Those are not the same squash plants that are going to be dying of powdery mildew or from the heat and humidity when that finally hits at the end of June, middle of June, end of May, beginning of July. Whenever that weather shows up, the plants. So I plant 2 successive plantings of that. What I found is that kind of when the morning temperatures start getting a little uncomfortable, like maybe lower 70s pretty consistently, that's when I'll plant another round of squash or zucchini. What I'm getting at is plants coming into a stressful situation that have not been producing for you already for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks tend to manage that stress better. So in with the okra and with the tomatoes, the stress for the tomatoes is the winter weather. For the okra, it's that peak weather of summer and the stress of harvesting off of those plants. And you know what takes them out? Well, the tomatoes too blight. The tomatoes I get wiped out with blights are the ones that I overwinter and try and push into the spring and into summer. And then with the yellow squashes and zucchinis, it's the heat of the summer is the stress. And it's pretty consistent. So on some of that stuff, if you plant something on the early end of a longer season or a regular size season and it's a short season crop, if you plant on the super, super early side and then kind of come into the end of that season, your plants start dying because of a weather change or something, you can't necessarily say that was the end of that plant season. Well, it was the end of that plant season, but I mean that specific variety. So to have 2 different kind of levels to look at, when I was trying to figure out which plants did really well over the summer, I couldn't just plant in the spring and then have them grow and die and be like, okay, this is when this plant dies. So I would plant, every 4 weeks, I'd plant another round, I'd plant another round, I'd plant another round, just to see how much longer these newer plants would go and would they produce. And the next round, see how long they would go and see how long they would produce. And then that kind of would tell me like how long the actual real season is for that plant. Anybody who has grown green beans knows it's kind of the same story. You only will get 3, maybe 4 good harvests off a green bean plant, but that doesn't mean that the season is over. If you want more green beans for a longer period of time, you have to do multiple successive plantings of that crop. Some types of broccoli, Rob, I've experienced that. Some types of sprouting broccoli, I've experienced that. So like right now, there's a lot of plants that fall into this category. So like right now, I'm actually putting more of our more heat tolerant broccolis out because the ones that we harvested the heads off of a month and a half ago, and we've been harvesting side shoots off of it as this weather warms up, it's like that's not the cooler weather that they grew up in. And they're stressed out from harvesting off of them and breaking the stems off. So I'm planting another round to just see how far we can push these types of broccoli into the warmer weather. So if your plants are dying from X, Y, or Z reason, heat, bugs, blight, fungus, nematodes, it's not a fair assessment to say that, okay, that's about when this plant ends if it's something, like I said, that you've been harvesting off of for like 3 months. Okay. So that's it for our nursery and garden report. Let's talk about water. So we already have a comment here. Hello, Seeds Insanity. Thank you for joining me on YouTube. Seeds Insanity says, I got a drip tape system from Haas Tools and like it, but not actually seeing the water makes me constantly wonder if I'm watering enough. LOL. I'm going to talk a little bit today about drip tapes and soaker hoses and drip tubing and some of the pros and cons. Really, the best thing I can do at this point is just kind of talk about what I do. Not saying it's the best, not saying it works in every situation, but this is just what I do. So I use micro sprayers. The specific type of micro sprayer that I use has a little cap on it that you can unscrew, and it sprays in a nice 360-degree pattern. And I just run a piece of the black poly pipe right up the middle of my beds and then punch into it, put a short little piece of 1/4-inch tubing, and then put the sprayer on it. The sprayers are on a stake and they stick in the ground, and that way I can kind of move them around in the bed just a little bit. You can adjust the cap on it to adjust the size of the circle. So just to give you kind of an idea, on a 4-foot wide by 16-foot wide bed, I have 6 of those right up the middle, and I get full coverage on the entire bed. They're probably opened up about 3/4 of the way. If we open them up all the way, it'll be watering more outside the bed. And it's a really nice spray pattern. I mean, like, it covers everything from where the sprayer is all the way out to where it stops. It's not like in streams or any of that stuff. I think it's called like a disc spray or something like that. All the way opened up at 30 PSI, these sprayers put out 20 gallons per minute each. Like I said, I probably have them opened up maybe half, 3/4. So it'd be about 10 gallons per minute each. Well, and a lot of my gardens have different PSI coming into it. So don't take what I'm saying as the bottom line rule. I'm just telling you what I do. So usually on my gardens that have automatic irrigation, when I first plant seeds and seedlings, I run my irrigation system for about 10 minutes a day, every day. And then kind of from there, I adjust. I always think about how much water my gardens need per week. So over the winter time, it's closer to like maybe 7 minutes a day when I first plant. And then sometimes if it's summer and not raining all the time, if we actually do go through like a drought period over the summer, which is rare, I might be up to 15 minutes a day. But I'm just saying like total per week. So let's just keep it simple. So let's say 10 minutes a day. Like that's my average. That's 70 minutes a week. My goal is to keep watering, and this is with all my sprayers at the same adjustment. My goal is to keep watering about the same per week and get it down to less days per week as soon as possible. Okay, so it's just going to depend on how quickly the transplants get established and like when the seeds come up. So I might take it to, let's say, 3 times a week or every other day for, so I've got to do math, 15 times. Well, every other day isn't going to be, so it'll still be about the same. So 3.5. So 2017. So I might take it to like 17 minutes every other day. It's 3.5. It's probably 18 minutes. Yeah, closer to 18 minutes. That would be 63 minutes a week that the water's running. And really my goal is to get it to maybe 2 times a week as soon as possible. So I might be watering for 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, 2 times a week. And you want to get there as quickly as possible, but relatively gradually. So what you're doing when you water with more water, less often, is you're encouraging your plants to get deeper roots. If you have like plants that have really shallow roots, like lettuce, when they're smaller, you might that's why you might need to water more often on the front end. But the lettuce will get pretty deep roots if you're watering more water less often. So you want to get to that as soon as possible. And you have to keep an eye on the plants and you have to keep an eye on the soil. You can also lessen how much water you need by mulching with like hay or straw or mulch, or they make some white fabric stuff that I don't use that, but something to help keep that moisture in, and you can start backing down. Now, why I use micro sprayers. I've used it all. I sell drip tubing. I have unused soaker hose. I've used the drip tape. For simplicity, consistency across all of my projects, I have found these micro sprayers to be superior to anything and everything that I've tried. These aren't the kind that are tall and spray to 45. They're different than that. I don't like those either. Those are too overhead. These spray relatively low. I like to be able to plant plugs, seedlings, or seeds wherever I want, depending on how the sun is, what my clients want. I like to be, fairly fluid in what I can do in the gardens. And my experience with the drip tapes and with the drip tubing is you're extremely limited. If you have drip tape or drip tubing, maybe a soaker hose, but you can't draw your finger in the dirt and sprinkle spinach seeds in right on top of each other if you have a drip tape or drip tubing, because they only water at increments. Now, to combat that, I do have on my website a drip tubing where the drippers are at 6 inches apart. I also have it at 9 inches apart, and I have it at 12 inches apart, which is what is kind of standard for the 1/4 inch. What you really, really don't want to use is that bigger drip tubing at 18-inch centers, because that's too far apart. That stuff's for landscaping plants. It drives me bonkers when I come onto like a commercial project, like a school garden or a community garden that was funded. It's not their fault, but they didn't find me or someone else to talk to. And they had a landscaper build their vegetable gardens for them. And they just have that big old 1/2 inch landscaping drip tubing crisscrossed throughout all the beds. It's awful. That's not what that stuff is for. And it does not work well for a vegetable garden. I mean, I'm not saying that If you had a row of the exact same thing every single year, 18 inches apart, I guess it would work. But especially in raised beds or vegetable gardening, if you've been doing this for more than 5 minutes, you realize that every single season is completely different. You keep evolving, you keep changing, you keep, you're doing companion planting, you're trying something you haven't tried for 2 years, and you're getting that back out or something. I mean, even if the stuff that you stay consistent with, you're moving it around, or at least you should be. That's called crop rotation. And we're not gardening or growing on acres and acres and acres where crop rotation is doing this field one year and doing this field. But most of us are gardening, very intensive gardening in very small spaces. And so to be able to move stuff around, and to be very fluid in your design of where what is going is very important. And I feel very, very confined, constricted, and limited with the drip tapes and the drip tubing. And again, now, the benefit of the drip tape and the drip tubing over the sprinklers, even my sprinklers, is one of the biggest killers for us here in Florida is our heat and humidity and all of the funguses and mildews and stuff that can wipe your plants out. And so, yes, my plants do get a little bit wet. I don't really see it as being a big problem. I keep the bottoms of my peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants trimmed up really well. If I am trying to extend the season on some zucchini or something before the powdery mildew shows up, you know what I do? I go out there where my squash plants are, and I don't want the squash plants themselves getting wet anymore, and I pop one of those sprayers off, and I put a coupler into the 1/4-inch tubing, and I get myself a couple feet of my 6-inch drip tubing, and I just zigzag it around the bottom of the already established plants that I have growing there when I need them to dry out. And then when that plant comes out, I just put the sprayer back on, because that's what I use 90% of the time are the micro sprayers. So it's really not that big of a deal to switch from a sprayer to the drip tape or drip tubing if you need it once the plants are established. It's super easy, and you can keep reusing those same lengths. You pop them off, maybe cut a little bit of the plastic off because it flares out, and put it away until you need it again. And then if you need it again, you pop one sprayer off after everything has been seeded and has come up, and you put your little drip tubing on, you wiggle it around the plants. So to be able to quickly move back and forth between the two, I think is a really good idea. But I totally get it. I get the drip tape. I get the drip tubing. If you're doing massive, 100-foot rows or something, I mean, at that point, you're probably not doing too much straight seeding other than root crops and stuff. But I'll tell you that the drip tubing that I have at the 6-inch centers, it really is good, because this one kind of oozes out, makes a circle, and this one oozes out, makes a circle, and there's a pretty good amount of overlap in between them, so you can still straight seed some stuff. But really, it's hard for me to make blanket statements like that, because it depends on your soil, it depends on your situation. In some people's gardens and their soil structure, like a drip is going to be an absolute nightmare and just not work, because it's just going to go straight down. Some soils just don't percolate really well side to side. They're hydrophobic. The water just goes straight through it. And I mean, especially if you're doing in-ground gardening or have a raised bed and you mixed in a lot of native soil, you're probably going to be in that situation. Some places in Florida, I mean, do have clay soils, which are going to hold more water. Clay soils have a tendency to like hold on to water and stay too wet. And at the same time, they like don't give up the water to the plants really easily either. So it really just depends on your soil type. There's a really cool thing you can do to check out your soil structure. And I do it with elementary school kids all the way to adults all the time. Get yourself a mason jar, fill it a 1/4 of the way up with your soil, fill it up with water, shake it really good, and then let it sit for a day. And then you can look online at like what each strata in that means and get a pretty good idea, like what percent sand your soil is, what percent silt, what percent clay. So you can look up little pictures online and get a real simple soil test just for your soil's structure. So if you have, and I tell you, that's one of the other problems with the drip, especially if you have hydrophobic soil. Even if you say had a plant here and a plant here, and you lined it up so that it's perfect, like the drip is right there and a drip is right there. So like each plant is getting water. Well, the plants aren't the only thing that need the water. I mean, there's something else really important going on, especially in organic farming or gardening, is the soil needs water too. So the bacterias, the fungi, all the little other organisms that live in the soil, they like to have a certain level of moisture in the soil too. In fact, a lot of these organisms, if the soil starts drying out, they'll kind of just shell up and go dormant and wait for conditions to get wet again. So a lot of these organisms and what they're doing are how our plants get nutrients. So if you have a plant, it's here and its roots go out to here and it's just putting water right there, but the soil's dry around here. I mean, like your plant might still be getting enough water, but there could potentially be nutrients in the soil out to the extent of where those roots are that the plant doesn't have access to, because all the soil microbes that are out there are dormant because the soil's dry. So keeping the soil consistently moist is very important, I think. Again, it depends on your soil type and your soil structure. If you don't have super hydrophobic soil, you could just be dripping it in, and that water could, through capillary action, make it out sideways. So I'm not saying that this applies to every single situation, but I'm just giving you the pros and the cons of micro sprayers versus drip tape. Now, if you have the time, the absolute best thing you can do, I think, if you have a small garden or if you have the time, is hand water. And I sell automatic irrigation systems, but I mean, hand watering is by far the best. I'm even guilty of it. I have my garden set up on automatic irrigation systems. What that means is that as the plants grow and as the season, like right now, we had a lot of rain. We had a nice wet winter, but right now the days are getting longer. The sun's rays are getting more intense. Probably if you have stuff in from spring, the plants are getting bigger. What I'm getting at is your garden's watering needs are probably going up. Just like in the fall, as the days are getting shorter and cooler, your garden's watering needs go down. So if you have an automatic irrigation system, you get complacent. And people tend, myself included, to not make the proper timer adjustments as either the plants are growing, as the garden's water needs change. So that's one of the biggest downsides to an automatic irrigation system, is you can become complacent on what your garden's watering needs are. So it's really important to stay super vigilant and keep checking your soil to see if it needs water. I do the finger scratch test down to my, like, just past my first knuckle. And if I'm hitting moist soil down around the base of the plants, if I'm hitting moist soil and I haven't gotten past, my first knuckle, it probably doesn't need water. If it's dry all the way down, gotta water. So either the soil's drying out too quickly or the plants are sucking the water up. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you have automatic irrigation happening in your garden, it's just another reason to not go out there. Or flip side, if your garden is relying on you to hand water it, that's another reason for you to go out there. So if your garden is 100% dependent on you from hand watering, those gardeners tend to either have a dead garden or they spend more time in their garden. Someone said, like, I love this saying, like, what's the best thing you can plant in your garden? Your shadow. So plant your shadow in your garden for a successful garden. That's the most important thing, is to be out there. On that same note, on the negative side, if you're limited on time and you have to sit there and hand water your garden and it takes you 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you're doing that 2, 3, 4 times a week, and you're limited on time, like that's all the time you have to go spend in your garden. Well, you're spending it watering instead of harvesting, picking off dead leaves, doing manual pest control, planting a new round of crop, planting another succession of beans, all the stuff that you can be doing in your garden, pulling weeds. So if you're limited on time, now you're spending it watering. So it's not a straightforward answer to a question of whether or not you should use automatic irrigation or hand water. If you're going to use irrigation, use a drip tape or drip tubing or a soaker hose or micro sprayers. There's no right answer and no wrong answer. It is going to 100% be what works best for you and your garden. The main thing that's really important, obviously, is that your plants get the water that they need. Now, what happens if they get too much water? Well, first of all, if you don't have good drainage and your plants get too much water, or your garden gets too much water, your soil can go anaerobic, meaning it's not holding enough oxygen for the microbes that need to live in your soil, and it can drown your plants basically, but it can also drown the soil and choke out the soil. So you can kill your soil. But probably what happens more often from overwatering, well, if you're using conventional fertilizer, I think probably the only fertilizer that you could be using that this wouldn't necessarily happen in is like a conventional Osmocote, because those are kind of like time released. In fact, you could actually over fertilize, because I think some of them actually do release more with water. I'm really not sure. There's a lot of different ones out there for different purposes, for different crops. So depending on how your conventional fertilizer is time released or is slow released, overwatering can either A, over fertilize your plants, or B, under fertilize your plants. So if it's in the under fertilizing your plants, that falls into the same category of what happens if you're growing your garden organically. So if you're growing your garden organically, basically we're putting a bunch of stuff in the garden, compost, worm castings, organic fertilizers, other than most, if not all, of your liquid organic fertilizers. The stuff that we're putting in our gardens to feed our plants is not available to our plants. And what makes this stuff available to your plants is the biology that's in the soil. And they kind of work in a conversation style with your plant, the biology. So the biology works off of cues from the plant works off of cues from the biology. So basically the plant makes sugars through photosynthesis and pushes it down into the roots. The biology loves the sugar, gets activated, goes out, starts breaking down what's in the soil, feeding it back to the plants. That's not 100% accurate, but you get the idea. Well, when the biology breaks down what's in the soil into a form that the plant can use, it's what we call soluble. That means it can dissolve in water. So if you're overwatering your garden, you could be taking fertilizer or nutrients that would have been available to the plant that the plant needs and pushing it out of the root zone. So washing it away, basically. So that's really why getting to that sweet spot where you're watering enough and not too much and not too little where the soil's drying out to be able to maximize the health of your soil, maximize the health of your plant, and maximize the health of the relationship between the soil and the plant. So we've got a lot of moving parts here. It's not just about keeping water inside that plant. Now, especially this time of year that the sun's getting higher in the sky, listen, if you go out to your garden at 1 o'clock in the afternoon right now, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and your collards or your broccoli or your kale is like laying down, that doesn't mean your garden needs water. A lot of these plants will wilt, and it also doesn't mean that they need shade cloth either. A lot of these plants will wilt in the heat of the day as the sun, they'll kind of push water down into the root, into their roots, and close up their stomata so that they don't lose too much water through transpiration. And then they also wilt because it minimizes the surface area of them being exposed to the sunlight. But that doesn't mean that they need shade cloth, and it doesn't mean that that they need water. So usually, if I'm checking to see if my plants are wilting, I'll check on them first thing in the morning and later in the evening. And you'll see, right, as soon as the sun's rays get off them, they stand right back up. So just because your plants are wilting does not mean there's something wrong with them. And it does not mean that they need water. Check the soil. If the soil's wet and it's 2 in the afternoon and it's a winter vegetable in February and March, it's just wilting from the heat of the day. That doesn't mean that there's a problem. So yeah, I've seen lots of people that overwater this time of year because their plants just don't look so happy. I also see, I mean, we're not talking about that today, but we need to talk about it in the next couple of weeks. I also see a lot of people putting shade cloth up, and that might extend your season for some of this stuff, but it also makes it take longer. I mean, whereas that doesn't, like, I guess, say if I want to have romaine lettuce for longer, I will in another couple weeks plant more lettuce in some more shady spots in our gardens. But the lettuces that we have out right now that we're trying to get to full head, I'm not putting shade cloth over them. It will give us smaller heads, and they'll take longer, which increases their chances of bolting later as it gets hotter. Because, but that's a conversation for another time. So let's talk about rain collection. If you've gone down this road before and you're new to Florida, or if you've gone down this road before, or you're new to Florida, or you're new to the idea of collecting rainwater, let me just tell you that our weather in Central Florida, it's either raining or it's not. And if you have a pretty sizable garden, I'm not saying to not supplement with rainwater, but you need to really, really think about storage. Because if you have a pretty sizable garden, you'll blow through a 55-gallon drum in less than a week. Easily. So, and if it's raining, a 55-gallon drum will fill up in 2 minutes. So other than, having it looks really cool on your downspouts outside, you're really not doing much because comparatively speaking, you didn't collect that much water, and you're not saving that much water because, we might go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks without rain to fill up that barrel. And then when it rains, the barrel fills up in 3 minutes. And if it's raining a lot where you can keep those barrels topped off, well, you don't need them. So my point is not a hard no, but you need more than one, probably way more than one. I mean, like if you're going to try and water your garden from mostly rainwater, you're going to need a lot. You're going to need a lot of storage, and water's heavy. So, you know, your cute little rain barrel might be up on some cinder blocks up high where you're getting some gravity feed. So unless you're going to build some big tall thing with 10 55-gallon drums on it, you need to think about storing a lot of water. And because water is so heavy, you probably need to think about storing it on the ground or even in the ground a little bit, keep it a little cooler. Well, now you got to think about how are you going to get the water up so it can go down, or how are you going to pressurize it so that it can get to your garden beds. So it's when you really start kind of wrapping your head around, and I mean, I have an asphalt roof. I don't even think I wouldn't even recommend somebody collecting rainwater off an asphalt roof and using it on their vegetable garden. There's a lot of heavy metals in that tar and stuff that probably aren't really good for you to ingest. Heavy metals that's a big concern of mine in my gardens because, you know, heavy metals can build up in your body over a long period of time. It's very, and we're just from living in the world that we live in, we're exposed to a lot of them already. I don't think you should exacerbate that. Let's just put it that way. And most of us have shingle roofs. So just something to think about. You need to consider, like, how are you getting the water from the rain barrel to your garden? You need to think about how you're going to store the water. And if you do store enough water to get you through 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, how are you going to keep it from growing algae? How are you going to keep it from getting mosquitoes? So I'm not saying hard no. These are just things to consider. These are all the things I've seen people give up on using rainwater. Rainwater tends to have a better, I think it's a little bit of, I think it has a little bit of a lower pH than, like, say, your tap water. Your tap water can have a little bit of a higher pH. Like, I'm talking like rainwater might be like 6.7, and then tap water might be like 7.2. Not a real big difference, but so rainwater tends to be a little bit more on the acidic side. I don't really think that's a good thing. I think that's maybe what they meant by acid rain. I don't know. Another source of water to think about and consider. Again, I'll talk about collecting rainwater. Let me tell you guys my idea on collecting rainwater and how. And I haven't done this yet, by the way. It's just an idea I have. I'm going to do it one day. So obviously, the safest and easiest way to collect or to keep massive amounts of water and to keep algae from growing in them is to have very, very large containers at or below ground level, out of the sun. And the question at that point is, how can you pressurize it to water your garden? Well, one choice is you can use a pump. However, unless you're there all the time, a lot of pumps cannot run dry. So if there's a crack in your system, if the solenoid pops open and those containers drain out, you could burn out your pump. So either find a pump that can run dry, which almost none of them can, or you got to have like a float switch so that the pump shuts off if the water level gets below a certain amount, but now you always have a certain amount of water that you're never using. So my idea is to still have a garden that gets its pressure from gravity, a gravity-fed garden. So you got all this water, it's down at ground level, and you really only need however much water you need in one watering up high, right? So you don't necessarily have to get these 275-gallon totes and put them all 20 feet in the air, right? You only need 20 feet in the air to get pressure enough for one watering, right? So maybe like 1 or 2 rain barrels, 100, 110 gallons up high, whatever it takes to water your garden in one watering, have that up high. So now you don't have expensive pumps that can burn out, and you should have enough water pressure to water your garden. Now, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but just FYI, most timers are slightly pressure actuated, so you can't just hook any timer up to a rain barrel and have it work. You have to use a mechanically actuated timer. It actually uses the battery power, and it has this little thingy that spins, and it's got a hole in it. It goes and then lets water through, and it goes and then stops. All the other ones are pressure actuated, like they need a certain amount of pressure on this end for them to be able to open and close properly. And your rain barrel is just not going to provide that. So usually when we're going into a rain barrel system using gravity fed, you got to use the drip tube. The drip tape, the micro sprayers won't even work. They need way too much pressure. So you got your rain barrels up high. They're filled with water. That's going to give you enough pressure to water your garden. Now the question is, and then you got your 275-gallon totes at or maybe buried halfway in the ground, so they stay cool and they don't collect as much algae. Got them covered up so that the sun doesn't hit them. So how do you get the water from the 275-gallon totes? Well, getting the water, you got to worry about getting the water into them. That's not as big of a deal. You just run it from your gutters if you don't have an asphalt roof. So galvanized roof will work fine. So the big question is, how do you get it out of the 275-gallon totes up to the 55-gallon drums? Well, there are these little things called bilge pumps. And a bilge pump's job is not to create pressure. A bilge pump's job is to move a lot of water vertically in the most efficient way possible, because bilge pumps are for boats, and usually a boat hull is very, very deep in the water. And if the hull is filling up with water, the bilge pump has to be able to pump the water vertically, quickly, up above the water level and get it out of the boat. Like, that's their job. And pull as little electricity as possible doing it. So bilge pumps are made to run off 12-volt battery power, because that's how most of boats are powered. Well, 12-volt also, and they can run at varying levels of voltage and amps. So as your battery starts dying, the bilge pump will still work. It just doesn't spin as fast, but it'll still work. So it doesn't need a exact amount. It'll still come on. It'll just run slower and not pump up as high. So if you got a bilge pump, they're like maybe 80 to 150 bucks for a bilge pump that would be able to pump up to a, I believe, 30-foot column of water. And because they are 12 volt and can run off any amount of power, you could actually hook those straight up to a solar panel. And then when the sun comes out, the bilge pump will run and pump that water up to your 55-gallon drums that are up high. And basically you just have an overflow on the 55-gallon drum. So if it's a really, really sunny day and the bilge pump kicks on and fills that 55-gallon drum up and overfills it, that the water would just come off the top and go right back down into your 275-gallon totes, which will be nice because it'll keep the water circulated, keep it from putrefying. The good thing about bilge pumps too is if it dries out, if your tote's empty, if there's a problem in your system, they can run dry for a long time. They can run dry until the cows come home, and it won't burn out your bilge pump. And if you do burn them out, they're really not that expensive to replace. So that's my idea on a gravity-fed, massive amount of water storage system. One day, I will put that in somewhere. So well water, that's another potential source. If you are going to use well water for your garden, I highly recommend in Florida that you get your well water tested for its pH. That's the most important thing. Especially if it's an old, I mean, even if it's been approved for drinking water, I would still test its pH. A lot of our groundwater here can come in at a really high pH. I've tested well water before that was like an 8.1, and they couldn't get anything to grow, and they couldn't figure out why. Well, that's why, because basically nothing they could have done would have worked, because that's just always taking water. It's an 8.1 pH and putting it on your plants. It'd be like just pouring acid on your plants if taking water that has a pH of 5.9 and pouring it on your plants, unless they were blueberries. But there's a lot of plants that can really, really thrive in a low pH. There's not too many that can thrive in a pH that's too high. Not your fruits and vegetables. They can tolerate, there's ones that can tolerate it, but not thrive. They don't want that high pH. So the rock structures in the ground in Florida can have a tendency to lean that well water, that groundwater, into a high pH. In fact, I know a nursery in Bushnell. Obviously, if you're running a huge nursery, you can't afford, to hook up to some municipality. You've got to use well water, and they have to have these big holding tanks because their pH is so high of their well water, where they have to mix in sulfuric acid. They buy sulfuric acid by the 55-gallon drum just to pull that pH down enough so that they're not killing their nursery plants. But just something else to take into consideration. A lot of people will water using city tap water, which I do in all of my gardens if it's available, and I do it here at the nursery. There's a lot of mixed opinion about that out there as far as is it good, is it bad? I have not seen any negative effects, I guess, in theory. And I'm here in Seminole Heights. Like, sometimes they'll put heavy, like, sometimes the water stinks. Like, you can tell they just cleaned it and they just treated it, and I don't have stuff dying all over the place. I know people that use a water filter. We're probably going to eventually get one here, but I've also found a lot of reviews on them that it's basically snake oil. They're not doing to the water what you think they're doing. I'm talking about like a whole home filter to get like chlorine out and stuff. Probably the best option would be to have your rain barrels that you're going to water off of. And if you don't collect enough water from rain, you can at least fill your rain barrels up with your city water, where it will sit and gas off for a few hours, just like if you were getting new fish in a fish tank. You need to air out the water first before you put new fish in it, or the fish die. So you can use like a holding tank for your water, let it sit for a little while, and then let it kind of let it gas off. So, excuse me just one second. I was going to talk a little bit about hydroponics today, but we've already gone over an hour, and that's a whole nother conversation. So, real interesting conversation. I'll just touch on it, let you guys do your own research, probably circle back to this in 2 weeks. But I saw a really interesting article. I mean, it was a little old, it's like years old, but there is this whole debacle about whether or not hydroponics should be allowed to be organic because they're not growing in soil. And And they have approved it. But just understand this, as far as my research goes, the organic hydroponic guys are not using any inputs that you would not be allowed to use if you were an in-soil farmer. I think I'm saying that right. So, I mean, I know I'm saying it right. I'm not sure if I'm communicating it right. The guys that are getting certified hydroponic. So when you grow hydroponically, you got all these inputs that you can use, right? So let's say on this shelf right here that they have inputs for their hydroponic system. If the stuff on that shelf is not allowed to be used on an organic farm, they're not allowed to use it on an organic hydroponic setup. So all of the inputs on a hydroponic setup that's certified organic would be allowed to be used on a organic in soil farm. But there's a lot of organic farmers out there that are upset because they think that organics needs to be in the soil. And there's a debate there. There's totally a debate there that can be had. I think it's very interesting to talk about, really get down into it at a granular level. Like, what are you calling soil? What level? So if I have my compost and I have peat moss and coconut coir and vermiculite and I put it in pots, is that a soil? Does it need a certain level of biology to be called soil? What if I use less compost and more peat moss and more coconut coir? At what point is someone over here growing in just perlite and just injecting food to their plant? So I think there's a lot of gray area, and it I think makes for a really interesting discussion. So I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to talk about in 2 weeks. Next week, I have on Rob Clements from Bob's Berries, and we are going to talk about everything about blueberries. What we're doing to our blueberries right now, what he's doing to his blueberries right now, what his feeding regimen looks like, when is he trimming back, how does he trim them back, and most importantly, he has a huge event coming up that I will be at, selling plants and seeds and fertilizer. It's in April, but it's also his grand opening for his yearly blueberry U-Pick. So tune in next week, and we'll be talking with Rob Clements. If I can get him on here, I'll get him on here. It's going to happen. And if you can't join me next week, you're more than welcome to email me questions. Email Rob questions about blueberries to info@whitwamorganics.com. That's info@whitwamorganics.com. Heck, send me an email anyway with your topic suggestions or gardening questions if you can't watch live, and join us. So thank you everybody who tuned in, and thank you everybody who watches these videos later. I just want to point out too that if you're watching this on Facebook and you're getting sick of being on Facebook, this is being simulcast live on YouTube right now. So thank you everybody for joining me, and I will see y'all next week.